Okay, last time we were here, chapter 22, things were getting pretty intense. Max had gone off the side of a cliff. Fortunately, he was safe, and Justin was frantically trying to help and find a way for Max to get back up. Because he couldn't climb down and help get Max up, but Max couldn't get up, so a little bit of a predicament. The last chapter says Max sniffed at the side of the cliff and scratched at the dirt. "It's okay, Max," Justin called down to him. "You're okay, pal." Before Justin could figure out what to do, he heard a sound behind him and spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. Tyler was coming straight for him. Okay, so that leads us into chapter 23. Justin took off, Tyler fast on his heels. Justin headed straight into the woods, hoping the trees would provide some cover. As he ran, he searched desperately for an escape route. Suddenly, he spotted the old crumbling railroad bed jutting out from the hillside off to his right and crossing the river. It was his best shot. Justin sprinted towards the bridge, which got bigger as he got closer, until finally it loomed over him. He stopped to catch his breath and studied the ancient-looking structure, or what was left of it anyways. It had clearly been out of use for a very long time. There were entire sections missing, either rotted away or broken by years of use, then abandonment. It was suspended probably 50 feet above the ground and stretched at least 100 feet across. The river flowed beneath it. Tyler's footsteps crashed through the bushes behind him. He was closing in. Justin had no choice. He put one foot onto the first plank of the wood. The whole bridge dipped and swayed. He swallowed hard and then took another shaky step. The wood beneath him shuddered. He gripped the splintering railing and looked down. Bad idea, he quickly realized. Better not to see how far there was to fall. Where was Max? Justin hoped he'd gotten down from the ledge, but he didn't see him anywhere below or in the woods around him. Justin took another shaky step, his eyes locked firmly on the long, treacherous path before him. He had to avoid the holes and pieces of board that were clearly not strong enough to support him. Suddenly, the entire bridge lurched and wobbled. Justin looked over his shoulder and saw Tyler racing toward him, clutching a handgun. Tyler didn't seem to care that the bridge was about to fall apart. He had a fierce and frightening look in his eyes. It was pretty clear Tyler cared about only one thing, getting his hands on Justin. "There's no way out of this, Justin," Tyler shouted after him. "You may as well give up now." "No way," Justin yelled back without turning around. He tried to pick up the pace, but was worried the whole bridge was about to collapse under their weight. Justin heard a sputtering engine in the distance, quickly growing louder. He looked down through the bridge to see Tyler's truck driving through the ravine, below them, still spewing smoke. "My backup is here, kid," Tyler called. "You're on your own out here." Before Justin had a chance to respond to Tyler's taunts, he saw a figure dart out in front of the vehicle. The man waved his arms at the car. Justin gasped. It was his dad, who pointed a gun straight at the windshield and fired. The truck swerved and crashed into the side of the hill. The back of the truck exploded in a burst of flame, and suddenly 1,000 gunshots pinged around the ravine. The ammunition in Tyler's truck had ignited. Tyler and Justin both dropped to their stomachs, covering their heads with their arms and lying flat against the boards. Bullets thwacked into the bridge all around them. After the explosion, everything went silent. His eardrums hummed. Justin peered down through a wide hole in the bridge. His heart nearly burst with relief and happiness when he saw his dad crouched behind a huge rock. He was okay. Justin just hoped that Max wasn't anywhere near the blast. When the smoke started to settle, Tyler scrambled to his feet and continued his advance on Justin. "You can't get away from me, you little..." Tyler slipped on a shard of wood, which snapped off and fell to the ground, landing with a distant crunch. He got up, wobbling and tipping as the bridge moved, but he kept coming. "The cops are on their way," Justin yelled. "You're never going to get away with this." "Cops? How are you going? How are they going to find us out in the middle of nowhere?" Tyler replied, moving a few steps closer to Justin. "Besides, I don't think the sheriff is going to care very much," he finished with a nasty laugh. Suddenly, a second loud explosion rocked the canyon and sent a spray of fire and light shooting into the air. A hot blast of air knocked Justin off his feet. The fire had made its way around to the back of Tyler's truck, setting off the rocket launchers in the cargo hold. Justin and Tyler ducked for cover, putting their hands over their heads. Tyler got up again and lurched forward, waving his gun in the air. "I'll kill you before I let you get out of here," Tyler snarled. Justin forced himself to his feet, ready to run. He took a step, then stopped short. The rocket launcher had blown a gaping hole in the bridge right in front of him. He swung his arms in the air, desperate for balance, catching himself just before he tipped forward and fell 50 feet to the ground. He spun around to face Tyler, who was closing in on him. There was nowhere for Justin to go. Justin froze, considering his options. He could stay where he was and hope Tyler fell through the crumbling bridge before he reached him, or he could face Tyler like Kyle would have, like a hero. Justin spun around just as Tyler was closing in on him. He could see the sweat pouring off Tyler's face, a look of pure hatred in his bloodshot eyes. He leveled the gun at Justin. Justin's vision narrowed to the pinpoint of the gun barrel, which was aimed right at his chest. His body vibrated with fear, but he couldn't let that stop him. He reached down and snatched up a large splintery plank of wood and held it up like a bat. He would go down fighting. "Tyler," Justin's dad called out from below, "don't you dare hurt my boy." Tyler ignored him and pressed forward until he stood just inches from Justin. He leaned in, his breath hot on Justin's face. "It didn't have to end like this, kid," Tyler said, his voice cold. "But Kyle always said you were going to surprise everyone one day." Justin's heart pounded in his chest. "I just don't think this is what he had in mind." Tyler finished quietly, his eyes digging into Justin's. They stared at each other out of the corner of his eye. Justin saw a flash of movement from behind Tyler. Relief flooded him. It was Max. He had somehow gotten down the side of the cliff and found Justin. Now he was full of aggressive war dog mode, heading straight for Tyler's back. "What do you think Kyle would say about this situation?" Tyler asked, glowering at Justin. Justin smiled at Tyler. Tyler shot him a confused look. "I think he'd say," Justin began, "Max, attack!" Tyler's eyes went big and round as he registered what was happening. He spun around and tried to steady his gun, but he was too late to help himself. Justin kicked out Tyler's leg and Tyler fell to his knees, firing a shot into the air. With a giant roar, Max leaped into Tyler's chest and locked his mighty jaw around Tyler's shoulder. Justin sprang out of the way as Tyler went flying backwards, but Max didn't let go. Instead, Max just clamped down harder on Tyler's arm, pressing himself against Tyler's body as together they fell through the giant hole in the bridge. The two plunged downward, spiraling as they fell. Max didn't let go of Tyler, loyal until the very end. "Max!" Justin screamed. He dropped to his stomach and looked down through the hole. Sirens screamed in the distance, getting louder and closer as Justin tried to absorb what he saw. Tyler lay against a giant rock at a painfully awkward angle, his body bent and twisted. On top of him lay Max. Justin's dog wasn't moving. Stay tuned.